Her name was Amara, and she lived a life she once thought impossible. Her husband, Chief Adekunle, showered her with riches beyond measure. Designer clothes filled her closets. Private jets carried them to distant lands. Gold dripped from her wrists and neck. People bowed when she passed. Yet Amara never let wealth change her heart. She smiled at house helps and remembered the hungry girl she once was. But whispers followed her everywhere. "She's nothing without his money," they said behind closed doors. "Just a village girl who got lucky." She heard them but stayed quiet, loving her husband deeply. Then one evening, during a perfect dinner overlooking the city lights, Chief Adekunle's face grew dark. His hands trembled as he reached for his wine. Something terrible was coming. Amara felt it in her bones. Chief Adekunle became a different man overnight. He stopped smiling. His phone rang endlessly with angry voices. He locked himself in his study for hours, pacing like a caged animal. Amara knocked gently, bringing him food he wouldn't eat. "Talk to me," she begged. He only shook his head. Days passed like heavy stones. The mansion felt cold despite its luxury. Servants whispered nervously in corners. Even the air seemed thick with dread. Finally, one night, he called her into his study. His eyes were red and swollen. Papers covered his desk like fallen leaves. He looked broken, defeated, nothing like the powerful man she married. "Sit down," he said quietly. His voice cracked. Amara's heart pounded as she lowered herself into the chair, preparing for words that would change everything. "There was a fire," Chief Adekunle began, his voice barely above a whisper. "My warehouses, my factories. Everything burned to the ground last week." Amara gasped, covering her mouth. "The insurance won't cover it. They found complications, technicalities. I don't know how, but someone sabotaged the policies." Tears rolled down his weathered cheeks. "My company is destroyed, Amara. Everything we own was tied to it. The investments, the properties, the accounts, all of it gone or frozen by creditors." The room spun around her. This couldn't be real. Just days ago, they were planning their anniversary trip to Paris. Now he spoke of ruin like a man attending his own funeral. "We must sell this house immediately," he continued. "It's already listed. We have 1 week to leave." Amara's hands went cold. Memories flooded back. Memories she'd buried deep. She remembered hunger that gnawed at her stomach for days. She remembered wearing torn clothes and sleeping on a mat with holes. She remembered her mother's tired face, aged beyond her years from struggling to survive. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, not back there. Please, not back to that." Tears streamed down her face as years of buried fear exploded from her chest. She had fought so hard to escape that life. The thought of returning made her physically sick. Chief Adekunle reached for her, but she pulled away, sobbing uncontrollably. Yet through her terror, something stronger emerged. She looked at her husband's broken face and felt love pierce through her panic. "I'm staying," she finally said through tears. "I'm staying with you." News spread like wildfire through their circle. "Chief Adekunle has fallen," people whispered gleefully. Suddenly, everyone had opinions. Old friends stopped calling. Business partners disappeared. Former associates pretended not to see them at gatherings. Amara held her head high whenever she went out, refusing to show shame. "My husband is a great man," she told anyone who dared suggest otherwise. "This is temporary." But their eyes held pity mixed with satisfaction. They enjoyed watching the mighty fall. Then one afternoon at the market, Amara ran into Auntie Beezy, a distant relative she'd helped pay hospital bills for just 6 months ago. Instead of gratitude, Auntie Beezy smirked. "I always knew you were just riding his money," she said loud enough for others to hear. "Now we'll see who you really are." Moving day arrived like a funeral procession. Trucks came to collect furniture that would be sold at auction. Amara walked through empty rooms one final time, remembering laughter that once filled these walls. Her footsteps echoed on marble floors she'd walked barefoot across on lazy Sunday mornings. The master bedroom where she'd felt safe in her husband's arms now stood hollow and cold. Workers carried out paintings, sculptures, the grand piano she'd never learned to play. She didn't cry. She couldn't afford to break now. Chief Adekunle stood in the driveway, watching his kingdom dismantled piece by piece. Amara took his hand and squeezed it. "We'll survive this," she promised. That night, they slept in a small rented room across town. Morning came with worse news. Men arrived to repossess their cars. Reality hit hard and fast. The small room had no air conditioning. Electricity was rationed. The neighborhood was loud and crowded, nothing like their peaceful estate. Chief Adekunle searched desperately for work, but doors closed in his face. His reputation had been destroyed along with his company. Bill collectors called constantly, their voices harsh and unforgiving. Food became a daily worry. Amara stared at her closet full of expensive bags and designer shoes. She picked up a handbag that cost more than most people earned in 6 months. Her hands trembled as she photographed it for online sale. Within hours, she had a buyer. The money came quickly but felt like blood money. Still, it bought them groceries for 2 weeks. It was something. It was survival. One by one, Amara dismantled her former life. The human hair wigs she'd collected, gone. The Italian leather shoes, sold. The gold jewelry, pawned. Each sale felt like losing a piece of herself, but she did it without complaint. Chief Adekunle watched with shame burning in his eyes. "You shouldn't have to do this," he said repeatedly. "I failed you." But Amara shook her head, forcing smiles she didn't feel. "We're in this together," she insisted. The money from her belongings kept them afloat day by day, but barely. They ate simple meals of rice and beans. Meat became a luxury. Then one day at the pawnshop, Amara overheard 2 women laughing. "That's Chief Adekunle's wife," one whispered loudly. "Look how far she's fallen. Selling her things like a common trader." The mockery grew bolder. People Amara had helped, people whose children she'd sent to school, whose medical bills she'd paid, whose businesses she'd supported, now turned their backs. Some laughed openly when they saw her. Others whispered just loud enough for her to hear. "Pride comes before a fall," they said with satisfaction. "She thought she was better than us." One particularly painful day, Amara encountered a group of women she'd once hosted at a charity luncheon. They pretended not to recognize her at first, then erupted in cruel laughter when she walked past. "From mansion to slum," one sneered. Amara kept walking, head high, but inside she crumbled. Only when she reached their small room did she allow herself to collapse. She cried into her pillow, muffling the sounds so her husband wouldn't hear. Amara became an expert at hiding pain. She smiled when creditors called. She laughed when neighbors gossiped. She stayed cheerful when her husband's face showed defeat. But at night, alone with her thoughts, the weight crushed her. Her body grew thin from stress and irregular meals. Dark circles appeared under her eyes. Her once glowing skin dulled. Yet every morning, she woke and chose to stay. She watched Chief Adekunle search for work that never came. She saw him age 10 years in 10 weeks. His shoulders slumped where they once stood proud. But she never blamed him. She cooked whatever little food they had. She encouraged him when he wanted to quit. She held him when he cried. The hunger gnawed at her constantly now. A familiar enemy from her childhood returned. One particularly dark night, Amara stood at their small window, staring into the darkness. Everything hurt. Her body, her heart, her pride. For the first time, a terrible thought crossed her mind. What if I just left? She could return to her family's village. Start over alone. Escape this suffering. The thought felt like betrayal, but also like relief. She closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. Then she remembered Chief Adekunle's laugh on their wedding day. She remembered how he'd held her hand through her mother's funeral. She remembered genuine love in his eyes when he looked at her, not just when he was rich, but always. "No," she whispered to the darkness. "I made a vow." The next morning, she sold her last valuable possession, a diamond bracelet he'd given her for their anniversary. The bracelet money lasted 3 weeks. Then there was nothing. They'd hit the absolute bottom. Their room's rent was overdue. The landlord threatened eviction daily. They ate once a day if lucky. Amara's hands shook from weakness. Chief Adekunle looked like a ghost of himself. They lay in bed one night, holding each other in the darkness, both wondering how much more they could endure. Amara had proven her loyalty beyond any reasonable measure. She'd sacrificed everything. Yet somehow, she still chose to stay. Then something unexpected happened. Chief Adekunle sat up suddenly. "Get dressed," he said, his voice strange and urgent. "Where are we going?" Amara asked, confused. "You'll see. Please, just trust me one more time." Despite everything, despite her exhaustion, Amara nodded and followed him into the night. They walked through dark streets, then caught a bus that took them far from their neighborhood. Chief Adekunle remained silent, his jaw set with determination. Amara was too tired to question him. Perhaps he'd found work. Perhaps a friend had finally helped. She didn't dare hope for much anymore. The bus stopped in a wealthy district she vaguely recognized. They walked down a street lined with grand houses hidden behind tall gates. Chief Adekunle stopped at one particular gate, pulled out a key, and opened it. Amara's heart began racing. The compound was massive, even bigger than their former home. Garden lights illuminated perfectly manicured lawns. A fountain sparkled in the center. And there, parked in a row, were their cars, the exact cars that had been repossessed. Amara's legs nearly gave out. She grabbed the gate for support, her mind refusing to process what her eyes saw. What is this?" she stammered. The mansion before them was breathtaking. 3 stories of pure elegance, with glass windows that reflected the moonlight like diamonds. It was easily twice the size of the home they'd lost. Their Mercedes, Range Rover, and Lexus sat gleaming as if freshly washed. But this made no sense. They were broke. They'd been selling her belongings just to eat. She spun toward her husband, whose face was unreadable in the shadows. "Adekunle, where are we? Whose house is this?" Her voice rose with each word. "Tell me right now what's happening." Fear and confusion swirled into something close to anger. Nothing about this moment made any sense. Chief Adekunle stood silent, his hands in his pockets, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. The night air felt thick and heavy. Amara's breathing quickened as terrible possibilities flooded her mind. Had he stolen this? Was this some elaborate crime? Was everything about to get worse? "Answer me," she demanded, her voice breaking. Still, he said nothing, just kept watching her with those unreadable eyes. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "Nothing was ever lost, Amara." His words hung in the air like smoke. She blinked, certain she'd misheard. What? The fire. The bankruptcy. The debts. None of it was real. The world tilted sideways. Amara felt as if the ground had opened beneath her feet. "What are you saying?" "It was a test," Chief Adekunle said quietly, his voice steady but cautious. "I needed to know if you loved me or my money. Everything was staged. The fire, the debts, the repossessions. I had to see if you would stay when I had nothing." Amara couldn't breathe. Her vision blurred as tears filled her eyes. The hunger. The humiliation. The terror. The nights she'd cried herself to sleep. The belongings she'd sold. Every moment of suffering replayed in her mind like a nightmare. "A test," she whispered, her voice dangerously soft. Then louder. "A test." Rage exploded through her body like lightning. She'd starved for him. She'd been mocked and humiliated. She'd sold everything she owned. She'd contemplated ending her life to escape the pain. And it was all a game. A cruel experiment. Do you know what you did to me? Amara's voice cracked with fury and anguish. I went hungry. I sold everything I owned. People I helped, people I loved, laughed at me in the streets. Tears poured down her face, hot and angry. I remembered what it felt like to be poor again. That fear, that hopelessness. I thought I'd escaped it forever, and you dragged me back into it deliberately. Chief Adekunle reached for her, but she slapped his hands away. I cried myself to sleep wondering if we'd be thrown out onto the streets. I stood at that window planning how to end my own suffering. Her body shook violently. Every day I chose to stay. Every day I sacrificed. And you watched me suffer for entertainment. She stared at him with eyes full of betrayal. Was my pain amusing to you? I sold my grandmother's bracelet, Amara continued, her voice raw. The last thing I had from her. I sold it to buy us food. She counted on her fingers, each sacrifice a fresh wound. I pawned my wedding jewelry. I watched you pretend to search for work while I destroyed my dignity selling my belongings. Her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow felt louder than screaming. I defended you when people said you were worthless. I told them you were a good man, that this was temporary, that I believed in you. She laughed bitterly. And all along, you were testing me like some laboratory experiment? Chief Adekunle's face had gone pale. Perhaps he was finally understanding what he'd done. Amara, please. Did any of it matter? She interrupted. Did my loyalty mean anything? Or was it just data for your little test? Amara wiped her face and straightened her shoulders. Something had shifted inside her. Something final and absolute. I can't stay, she said quietly. The words felt like stones in her mouth. What? Chief Adekunle's eyes widened with panic. I proved my love. I passed your test. But I can't be with someone who would torture me to satisfy his own insecurity. She turned toward the gate, her body trembling but her resolve solid. Each step felt impossibly heavy, like walking through water. She'd given everything to this man, suffered everything for him. But this betrayal cut too deep. Love shouldn't require such cruelty to prove itself. Amara, wait. His voice cracked behind her. She kept walking. Please. I'm sorry. I was wrong. Still, she moved forward. Her feet carried her toward the gate, toward freedom, toward self-respect. Amara, stop. Chief Adekunle's voice broke completely. She heard him stumble, heard him fall to his knees behind her. Please don't go. I can't lose you. His sobs were raw and desperate. I was scared. I've been used before. Women who only wanted my money. My first wife left me the moment business got difficult. I couldn't bear that again. Amara paused but didn't turn around. I had to know you were different, he continued, his words tumbling out between sobs. I know it was wrong. I know I hurt you. But every day you stayed, every sacrifice you made, I felt more guilt and more love. You're real, Amara. Your love is real. I had to be sure. She stood frozen, her hand on the gate. Her heart warred with her mind. I'll do anything, Chief Adekunle begged from where he knelt in the driveway. Anything you ask. I'll spend the rest of my life making this up to you. His voice was hoarse, destroyed by crying. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know what I did was unforgivable. But please, please don't leave me. For the first time in their entire relationship, his pride was completely gone. No more chief, no more powerful businessman, just a broken man facing the consequences of his choices. I love you more than anything, he whispered. More than this house, more than the money, more than my own life. And I proved it by risking losing you. I'm a fool. I'm sorry. Amara's steps slowed further. Her hand trembled on the gate. Every part of her screamed to keep walking, to preserve her dignity. But her heart was breaking. Silence stretched between them like an ocean. Amara's hand remained on the cold metal gate, ready to push it open and walk out of his life forever. She had every right to leave. Every justification. Any reasonable person would go. The night air was cool against her tear-stained cheeks. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. The fountain continued its peaceful bubbling, completely indifferent to the human drama unfolding in its presence. Behind her, she heard Chief Adacunnel's ragged breathing. No more words. Just silence and sorrow. Slowly, painfully, Amara's hand fell from the gate. Her shoulders sagged with exhaustion, not just from tonight, but from weeks of suffering. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath that hurt her chest, and turned around. One small step. Then another. Moving back toward the man who'd broken her. Amara stood before her husband, looking down at him kneeling in the driveway. His face was wet with tears, his expensive clothes dusty and wrinkled. He looked up at her with such desperate hope and fear that her heart cracked open completely. She didn't speak. Couldn't speak. Instead, she simply knelt beside him and took his face in her hands. The anger was still there, burning like a coal in her chest. The hurt was still there, deep and bleeding. But beneath it all, underneath the pain and betrayal, love remained. Stubborn, impossible love. She pulled him close, and they both collapsed into each other, crying years of fear and pain into each other's shoulders. No words of forgiveness were spoken. No conditions were set. Just two broken people choosing each other despite everything. Sometimes love isn't about deserving. Sometimes it just is. The weeks that followed were different. Chief Adacunnel didn't just apologize. He spent every day showing his remorse. He took Amara through the mansion, showing her everything he'd prepared. Every room was furnished with her favorite things. The master closet was filled with new clothes, new jewelry, new bags. Everything she'd sold, replaced 3 times over with finer versions. He'd tracked down every item she'd pawned and bought them back, including her grandmother's bracelet. He showed her bank accounts in her name alone, money she could access without his permission. "I want you to always feel secure," he said. "Even with me." But Amara barely looked at these things. The gifts didn't heal her wounds. Only time, patience, and his genuine efforts to rebuild trust would do that. "I don't want tests," she said simply. "I want truth." Months passed slowly. Healing wasn't instant or easy. There were days Amara still felt the phantom hunger in her stomach, still remembered the cruel laughter. Chief Adacunnel never asked her to forget or move past it quickly. He carried his guilt visibly, treating her with careful tenderness. But gradually, something new grew between them. Not the naive love from before, but something deeper, tempered by fire. They talked honestly about his fears and her pain. They set boundaries. They rebuilt trust one small moment at a time. The mansion became their home, but it wasn't about the wealth anymore. They'd learned the hardest way possible that love couldn't be tested into existence. It had to be chosen freely, every single day. Their relationship began again, scarred but stronger, built not on romance or riches, but on the unshakable decision to truly see and choose each other, flaws and all.